We're launching our latest report. This is HRNK's 62nd report, and also the 7th Bob Collins report. His work with HRNK has been extensive. His wise counsel as senior advisor to HRNK has been absolutely excellent. It's a very busy week for us. We're having this event today. We're having another event on Thursday, co-hosted with the South Korean Ministry of Unification. One co-hosted, virtually with members of the European Parliament tomorrow, and one at 1 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, involving the participation of all European Union missions to Beijing, China. I'm doing this with our Dutch colleague, Rick Herzewoord. We brought this onto ourselves. It is very important that I mention that this report on North Korea's propaganda and agitation department is dedicated to a late board member of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, HRNK. Jieun was a board member here. He was also the founding director of the Korean service of Radio Free Asia. Bob and our team and I decided to dedicate this to Jieun. He was also a personal friend and great mentor. So today we are absolutely delighted to host our introductory keynote speaker, Ambassador Julie Turner, our own U.S. Special Envoy on North Korean human rights, who has been an expert on democracy and human rights in Asia for 20 years. She has recently been Office Director in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, also Director for Southeast Asia, the National Security Council. She hails from Pepperdine University, the University of Maryland. She is well known, very liked by everyone in the human rights CSO community for her knowledge, her hard work, and her dedication to this issue. Ambassador Turner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Greg, for the kind introduction and for inviting me here today. I think, I'm glad that you clarified that I am well liked by civil society organizations, because I'm pretty sure, based on the North Korean statements, that I'm not very well liked by the North Korean government. But, after being called a wicked woman one too many times, I'm hoping that I can build a bridge there. But thank you again for inviting me to be here today for the release of this report. I commend Robert Collins for the excellent product that we will be discussing today. Understanding the DPRK's propaganda and agitation department is crucial as the regime intensifies efforts to enforce ideological purity. The PAD plays a central role in shaping and disseminating the state's narrative, influencing public opinion, and maintaining control. The human rights situation in the DPRK is one of the most protracted human rights crises in the world, and the COVID-19 pandemic has allowed Kim Jong-un to further tighten his control over all aspects of life in the isolated country. 3 new laws, which target perceived anti-socialist or non-socialist behavior, the 2020 law on rejecting reactionary ideology and culture, the 2021 Youth Education Guarantee Act, and the 2023 law on the preservation of the Pyongyang dialect, are reflective of the DPRK's repression and other tactics that provide valuable context for comprehending the regime's strategy in suppressing dissent and reinforcing its ideological stronghold. Although the DPRK's borders are slowly reopening, we can expect many of the measures instituted under COVID to remain. This includes the 3 anti-socialist or non-socialist behavior laws that I just mentioned, the new walls along the border with China, and crackdowns on informal markets, which have served as vibrant hubs for information exchanges. in-person and digital surveillance and monitoring, as well as severe punishments for anyone accused of violating restrictions, serve to further the regime's goals of total control of information consumption in the country. The US government has worked in this space for many years, promoting the free flow of information into, out of, and within North Korea. Along those lines, our programs have focused on 3 prongs in particular. The first prong is the curation of content, targeting different populations within North Korea, from elites down to individuals living in the border area, and include resources such as news, as well as pop culture. Every single North Korean that I have met in my 20 years focused on this issue has a story of a piece of foreign information that made the difference for them. For some, it's a movie. I think we all know of the story of the one refugee woman who was moved by the movie Titanic. But I just recently, and some of you may have heard me tell this story, met a young female defector who told me it was the hair product that she used, which happened to be a South Korean product while she was a restaurant worker overseas. And she realized that without my South Korean hair product, my life will not be the same, and going back to North Korea was just a bridge too far. So I've always been struck by these anecdotes of the impact and the power that exposure to the outside world can have on these individuals in changing their worldview and how they perceive both their space in the world and their role in relation to their government and their government's role in relation to them. And so this area in particular has been an area that has been critical in my own theory of change in relation to North Korea, and work like this report on the pad is really important in helping us to understand how to counter those efforts that the DPRK has undertaken to control information. I will also just note that under the North Korea Sanctions Policy Enhancement Act, the US government does have tools that allow us to sanction individuals for serious human rights abuses, but also for censorship. And we have used that particular prong of the law to take action against institutions in the DPRK that are involved in censorship. And so having reports like this help to facilitate that work that we're doing to name and shame and expose individuals that are responsible for repressing information in the DPRK. More broadly, as we observe the DPRK's human rights record further deteriorating, we need to end zero-sum thinking about international peace and security and human rights. We cannot effectively resolve the DPRK's threat to international security without addressing the human rights crisis in the DPRK. The DPRK's human rights violations and abuses are inextricably linked with the country's unlawful WMD and ballistic missile programs. It is the repressive political climate that allows the government to divert such large share of public resources to the weapons development without objection from the population, which continues to suffer from severe economic hardship and malnutrition. Forced labor, both domestically and overseas, also plays a key role in sustaining government and generating the revenue it uses for the weapons program. According to NGO reports, including reports by HRNK, North Korean defectors have said they faced years of work for either no wages or symbolic compensation, and either had to pay bribes or face severe punishments if they did not report for work at assigned workplaces. The DPRK sends workers to other countries to work in jobs in a variety of sectors, including construction, hospitality, and information technology. As the 2022 HRNK report shows, these workers are forced to send 90% of their salaries to the DPRK government. They work long hours, sometimes more than 18 hours a day, and are under strict surveillance without freedom of movement, particularly when working overseas, as their passports are often held by a site supervisor. This is done with the complicity of local authorities. These workers live and eat and work in confined spaces, are required to attend regular indoctrination sessions and watch state media together, and are prohibited from accessing independent information, including using a cell phone or risk severe punishment. And all of these actions are very symbolic of a new trend that we're seeing in the human rights community called transnational repression, in which a government overextends its authority beyond its borders to repress the rights of individuals overseas, whether it's their citizens or another nation's citizens. And we have certainly seen the DPRK do this over the years, both with the Sony hack that many of us will remember, but also, as I just described, in terms of the conditions for its overseas labor force who are regularly forced to attend these indoctrination sessions. Another example of the regime's transnational repression against individuals outside of its sovereign borders includes the forcible repatriation that has been in the news quite a bit lately, particularly as the border has reopened. We have all seen the credible reports that the PRC has repatriated large numbers of North Koreans, including some asylum seekers, to the DPRK. We, on the State Department side, continue to raise this issue directly with the PRC and call on all governments to respect the principle of non-refoulement. The North Korean people have suffered far too long under these abusive policies, and I look forward to working with our government and other partners and allies, but also civil society and many of you in the room here today, to make clear the link between the regime's human rights violations and abuses and its weapons program. Similarly, I hope to make clear that this is not necessarily a zero-sum relationship, or that there is not necessarily a zero-sum relationship between accountability and cooperation with the DPRK on human rights. Many of you have heard me say before that I do firmly believe that we can continue to speak loudly and clearly about the most egregious human rights violations in North Korea, and that we should work to promote accountability for those most responsible for those human rights violations and abuses. I will seek to reinvigorate the accountability efforts at the UN, especially as we approach the 10-year mark of the Commission of Inquiry report. As many of you know, on August 17th, after a 5-year gap, the UN Security Council held an open session devoted to human rights abuses in the DPRK. Between 2014 and the last session in 2017, these sessions were held annually, and we hope to reinvigorate that process now. It's important that we continue to maintain the momentum that we're building right now and to push for concrete change for the North Korean people. While promoting accountability, it's also important to identify areas in which the DPRK may be open to cooperation and reform, whether it's with us directly or international organizations or other governments or civil society partners. For example, in September, the DPRK Supreme People's Assembly discussed as its top issue laws guaranteeing the rights of persons with disabilities, which may provide an opening for engagement on this important human rights issue. Another area I hope to cooperate with the DPRK on is the reunion of Korean American families divided from their loved ones in the DPRK. The time for reunions is now or never, as many of these individuals are in their 80s and 90s now. These efforts hold the DPRK to account while also pursuing engagement in areas of opportunity are not oppositional but are intertwined. Thank you again for allowing me the honor of speaking to you today. I look forward to hearing more about Robert's important work on the pad and to listening to the important insights from the esteemed panel. Thank you.
Ambassador Turner, once again, thank you very much. Terrific, inspiring remarks. Now let me invite our panelists to join me at the panel table. We're going to hear from the report author first, then we'll have recorded remarks from two of the experts in this field of information, Nat Kretchun and Jieun Baek. And then we'll continue with Professor Colonel Maxwell and Dr. Hutchinson. And if we have a few minutes left, we'll conclude with the Q&A. I hope that sounds like a plan. That said, let me turn it over to Robert Collins. Once again, this is his 7th HRNK report. He has 37 years of service and experience as a soldier and a U.S. Department of the Army civilian employee. He was famously in charge of strategy for the 4-star in South Korea. For many years now, he has combined his knowledge of the North Korean regime dynamics with what he has coined as North Korea's policy of human rights denial. This is the latest installment in this series of Bob Collins reports. Bob, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. And thank you for all of you that are coming to attend this event. The first thing I would say is Ms. Turner's reception of an attack by North Korea obviously was designed and scripted by the PAD, because they're the ones that are always describing how to attack the enemy, and obviously the PAD has to take the position that she's the enemy because she's adamantly opposed to the ideals of the Kim Jong-un regime. The second thing I would say is that on page 11 of the Roman numerals, there's a quote in there from a defector. I think this is very important to understand the effect of PAD, and that is there's room for grass to grow on the sidewalks, but there's no room in the North Korean brain for anything else other than Kim regime ideology, because they have to keep any other ideology out. And that kind of explains the intent, the goal of the regime, and the propaganda agitation department is the one that carries that out. It's their responsibility. So there's a few notes here that I'll be referring to. The propaganda agitation department has 3 targets for which they devote their time and energy, which is pretty massive and critical to regime survival. First is praising the Kim Jong-un regime. That's their most critical target, and they spend an exorbitant amount of time. Everybody that works as a reporter, as a musician, any aspect that conveys information, they have to focus on that. If they don't focus on that, then they don't last long in the PAD, and they don't last long in any structure within the regime. Secondly is the indoctrination of the entire general populace of North Korea. They have to take that, make sure that there's no other room in that each individual North Korean brain to access any foreign ideology or foreign information and stuff of that nature. And then 3 is attacking the enemies. And the enemies are fairly obviously. It's South Korea, it's the United States, it's the Republic of Korea, U.S. military alliance, and even Japan. So, and anybody else that tries to denigrate the values of the Kim regime, whether it's the United Nations, the European Parliament, or whomever, those are the targets of the enemy. The organization of the PAD is in section 2, and there are 9 sets of. It explains how there's 9 sets of notes that each North Korean must keep, because every time they go to Sengwal Chonghwa, or lifestyle self-critique, which is at least a weekly basis for every North Korean, starting from the 4th grade up until they die. There are 9 notes that every North Korean has to jot down, and this will be inspected on a weekly basis. And you can see those notes on page 15. And so the mission, objectives, and internal structure is all within that second section. I won't delve into it because it'll take much. I don't have that much time, quite frankly. The section 3 provides a history of the PAD. It's noteworthy that Kim Jong-il's began his career in the party in the propaganda and agitation department. Later on, in the early 70s, he moved to the organization and guidance department, which oversees the work of the propaganda and agitation department, which is what the OGD's organization and guidance department does for absolutely every element within society, under the regime, under the government. They control all of that, and that's all explained in another product that HRNK has published called the OGD, the Control Tower. And so it's very important to understand that propaganda and agitation began long before the party did. When the Soviet 25th Army came down and took control of the northern part of Korea above the 30th parallel in 1945, it brought in its Soviet Koreans, Koreans that grew up in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan because decades earlier, Stalin didn't trust the Koreans that were living in the Far East because he thought that there was some relationship with the Japanese. So he just up and moved all of them to Central Asia. Of course, those individuals, to be successful in the Soviet society, had to join the Communist Party, and so when the 25th Army came down, those Koreans came in to shape those that are in North Korea. And those were individuals that started the propaganda and agitation department, started recruiting individuals that were in and from North Korea to do this. And so the PAD actually started before the Korean Workers' Party even existed. In section 4, it talks about the messages, the organization of propaganda that it creates and what messages it determines. There are three ideological systems that are very critical to the work of the PAD. One is the monolithic, the 10 principles of monolithic ideology, or TPMI. This tells every North Korean how to think. This is like their version of a Bible in North Korea. And that, along with the Korean Workers' Party charter, there's the law of the land, so to speak, for every North Korean. It also establishes, emphasizes the monolithic guidance system, which means there's only one place of guidance, and that's the supreme leader, currently Kim Jong-un. And they have 11 primary themes. You can see that on page 22. And those are the themes in which the emphasis of the propaganda and agitation department does through various different types of its departments, whether it's music or even plays or newspapers or whatever. All those organizations are controlled. There's a section in the PAD that controls each of those, and their intent is to make sure there's no room for any other views other than the Kim regime views. The section 5 talks about how the PAD uses the media and art to shape North Koreans, and so all the entertainment, whether it's dancing or singing or whatever, they have to praise the regime, and so, excuse me, believing that somehow that some foreign form of entertainment can be shown in North Korea other than illegally by regime standards, that's, it's just not going to happen. At least it's not going to be permitted, I should say. Of course, the censorship activities are pretty critical in today's world because of the how the internet and electronics have changed so much, and that movies, messages, the text messages that come from China into the northern part of North Korea, cell phones and that are difficult to track. This is a very critical battle for the PED right now. It certainly has a priority. It's interesting that recently, every iPad, every computer that is in North Korea, the populace has been warned that they must have that recorded by the Ministry of State Security. And if they don't, then they're going to be under arrest and perhaps suffer the greatest of punishments, which we all know is death. It's not unusual for the regime to find any excuse they need to execute those that they see as their own personal enemies in North Korea. So censorship is a major issue, a priority for them right now. In the Section 7, we focus on education. All this indoctrination that this report is about starts for every North Korean at the age of 3 years old. They go to preschool and they see these murals that show little kids attacking the evil American, and that's how they start their lives. Interesting story I will tell you. I've talked to over 200 North Koreans and interviewing them. And the way I got to so many is there was a number of churches in Seoul that specialize in serving the North Korean populace. So I just go to those churches and ask the pastor, can you introduce me to so-and-so or whatever? And that's the easiest route to there. One of the guys that I interviewed, he saw me and looked at me and he says, he's seen pictures of Uncle Sam in the the media, and he said, I spent my whole life learning how to kill you. I said, hey, I understand. It's the same for me, how to kill you. So we just laughed it off, and it turned into some great interviews. But for teachers, although teachers aren't an official part of the PAD, they have to teach the propaganda. So essentially, every teacher is a propagandist. They're also an agitator. It agitates for the young minds of students to agitate against South Korea, the United States, or any of the enemies that are the topic of the day. And so the teachers should be seen as an adjunct group to the PAD. The propagandists in the military, George has written an excellent report published by HRNK on propaganda within the North Korean military. What I would add to that is that the structure of propaganda is under the control of what is called the General Political Bureau, which works directly for the Organization and Guidance Department. And within the General Political Bureau, every unit is assigned a political officer and a propagandist. And so every Saturday, every soldier must sit down in front of a group, within a group, and the propagandist comes out and say, you will think this, you will believe this, you will take action on this. And so they get their daily dose or weekly dose of propaganda. And it's up to the political officer to ensure that that's reinforced every day within that structure. And I mean, when I say every unit, I mean every unit. regardless of the type, whether it's combat, logistics, medical, it doesn't matter. Section 9 is all about focusing on the Kim family regime cult, praising Kim Il-sung, praising Kim Jong-il, and now praising Kim Jong-un. It's one that they spend a lot of time on. Like I said, praising the regime is one of the 3 primary targets of the PAD. Section 10 is a list of past leaders and bios for some of them. Section 7 covers the human rights aspects of the human rights denial aspects of the PAD. Ms. Turner covered that pretty much in depth, and I really don't have much more to add to what she said because she covered it so accurately. The last thing I would say, excuse me, is the future role of the Propaganda and Agitation Department obviously is stuck on one very important aspect within the regime, and that's not only regime survival, but on who's going to be the next leader within the Kim family. Right now, Kim's children are far too young to, be designated this or that. You see in the press an awful lot of pictures and discussion on his oldest daughter, who's about 11 years old. So that's all part of it's designed by the PAD. All the pictures you see are PAD, and their intent is to make sure that every North Korea understands who's going to follow on in the leadership, and that there's not going to be any change just because Kim Jong-un might pass on eventually, which he probably will. I don't see why he's already not suffering from diabetes, but at any rate. Those are my remarks and covering on the report. I hope you all find the report of some value. And so now I'll end here and take over Greg.
Terrific, Bob. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. Are we ready for the recorded remarks? That is terrific. So our 2 colleagues, Nat Kretchun and Jieun Baek, were unable to join us. I believe both of them are in Seoul right now. Nat is the Senior Vice President for Programs at the Open Technology Fund, OTF, a congressionally funded nonprofit organization that supports the development and deployment of circumvention, privacy, and security technologies for populations living under repressive information censorship regimes. Nat is well known for his report, A Quiet Opening: North Koreans in a Changing Media Environment. He was with Intermedia at the time. There was also follow-up, Compromising Connectivity, Information Dynamics Between the State and Society in a Digitizing North Korea. Jieun Baek, Dr. Jieun Baek, is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, Indo-Pacific Security Initiative. She's the author of North Korea's Hidden Revolution: How the Information Underground is Transforming a Closed Society. She's also working right now on her 2nd book, Hidden Discontent: Unraveling North Korea's Elites' Grievances and Their Potential for Regime Instability.
Hello. I'm very sad I couldn't be with you all in person today, but thanks very much to Greg and HRNK for having me virtually, and a hearty congratulations to Bob on this important contribution to the literature. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nat Kretchun, and my work on North Korea has focused primarily on the flow of foreign information into and within North Korea, including recently a greater focus on the technologically sophisticated ways the North Korean regime is attempting to prevent information from getting in and circulating. Thus, what I look at is in quite close dialogue with the huge and frankly underappreciated effect that the PAD and its, to quote Bob, quoting Kim Il-sung, medicine has on the lives of ordinary North Koreans. While the report presents a really comprehensive look at the PAD in historical and bureaucratic context, I wanted to focus my couple of minutes here on Section 6, which looks at censorship and the PAD's role in that. It's probably important to level set just how serious the North Korean leadership is about censorship. In the PRC, by contrast, when Deng Xiaoping was first inaugurating the era of reform and opening, he espoused a pretty realistic view of the trade-offs that it entailed. He famously quipped that if you open a window for fresh air, you have to expect some flies to blow in. Now, let's contrast that with what Kim Jong-un said at a Workers' Party conference in 2014. He said, "We must set up 2 or 3 layers of mosquito nets to prevent the poison of capitalism from being persistently spread by our enemies across the border into our territory." So he's talking there about multiple levels of redundant control. The North Korean regime is not interested in carefully calibrating trade-offs. They're interested in as close to perfect control of the information space as possible. And this is abundantly clear when you look at the types of technology the North Korean state has developed to aid in its information control efforts. Network digital devices such as cell phones and tablets in North Korea are unparalleled in terms of how controlled they are. Censorship is too quaint a term here, frankly. Any content on a North Korean device or network must be cryptographically validated through a series of state-controlled signatures. This results in an incredibly clean network and digital environment in which very little content that is not state-approved can circulate. And that's just one of a litany of controls far beyond what other authoritarian regimes can even attempt, really. Furthermore, there are numerous indications that this form of digital control is the direction of travel for the state. Having found ways to make digital communications device a vector for control rather than a vector for dissent, the regime appears poised to extend networked forms of control to more parts of more North Koreans' lives. So how does this relate to the PAD? Most analyses of censorship implementation in North Korea focus on security services, in particular the Ministry of State Security. And while that isn't wrong, the MSS and specially tasked groups like Group 109 do play a big role in censorship enforcement. It's an incomplete picture. To ignore the role of the PAD is to mischaracterize the information environment as it's experienced by the vast majority of North Koreans. Such tight censorship creates a content vacuum, which the PAD is tasked with filling with the ideological content that this report highlights so well. Because what North Koreans manage to learn from non-approved or foreign sources is in dialogue with state narratives that the PAD advances, the efficacy of the censorship regime has a direct impact on how ideological messaging is received and processed. And similarly, the quality and consistency of the PAD's ideological indoctrination influences how any outside media or information is received and processed. You know, one of the most interesting findings from a report I wrote about a decade ago now called A Quiet Opening was that while high exposure to foreign media could significantly change North Koreans' beliefs and attitudes about the outside world, it was impossible to find meaningful, statistically significant patterns on the impact of foreign media exposure on beliefs about the North Korean state itself. The best we could postulate was that the state's ideology about itself is so pervasive that it couldn't be disentangled from what people might independently think about it. The PAD creates the context for everything else a North Korean might see, hear, or read. In that sense, when we think about the impact of foreign media in North Korea, it's vital that we keep the ideological baseline that the PAD sets pretty firmly in mind. This report creates for us an important foundation on which to examine changes we see in the country, and none more interesting in my view than new technological developments. Just as digital networks have enabled new forms of censorship, they also suggest new ways that the PAD might attempt to fulfill its ideological mission. And these changes can also introduce new social dynamics that the PAD must respond to maintain ideological control. As Bob quotes one former North Korean scientist saying, information in North Korea is meant to be unidirectional. However, despite the really strict technical controls I described, cell phones have introduced new multi-directional information dynamics that have the potential to complicate the lives of North Korea's domestic propagandists. So What I'm basically driving at is this report creates a great foundation for us to continue to, in a really well-grounded way, watch this space. And finally, I'd just like to sign off with a note of appreciation for the rigor of this report. North Korea is not the easiest place to study on a good day, and since the pandemic, sources that we often rely upon are even less accessible than they once were. However, thanks to Bob and HRNK's efforts, we have a stronger grounding for understanding and contextualizing what we do get out. So thanks again for having me. Congrats, and have a great rest of your event. Thank you.
It is truly encouraging to see, well, he's still young, to see young, bright scholars in this field, Nat and Jieun, actually draw not only inspiration but also very useful background knowledge for their work from the reports that Bob Collins, George Hutchinson, HRNK have been producing.
Good morning. My name is Jieun Baek, and I'm thrilled to be here as part of today's important report rollout. Thank you to Greg Scarlatoiu, to Ambassador Julie Turner, and to my esteemed colleagues Nat Kretchun, David Maxwell, and Dr. George Hutchinson for being here today. I'm particularly grateful to Bob Collins, who wrote this report. I find us all to be fortunate to be able to read a very well researched deliverable on one of the most effective instruments that allow the North Korean regime to sustain itself for so many decades. The following quote in this report captures the power and the effectiveness of the Propaganda and Agitation Department. Quote, the Korean Workers' Party, through the Propaganda and Agitation Department, designs and structures every North Korean life to be lived for the benefit of the regime, end quote. The 12 sections of this report present in detail the history, the infrastructure, the efficacy, and the future of North Korea's PAD. I would like to do two things today in response to this report. First, to drive home the report's overarching point of how ideological indoctrination takes place at every level for every citizen in their daily lives, let's walk through a North Korean child's average day using Bob's research in this report, hoping that we can bring to life this report. So let's take a little preschooler in Pyongyang. As this girl walks to school, she walks past Soviet-style infrastructure and architecture, monuments and sculptures, all carefully designed to inculcate people with the idea that the state overpowers the citizen. She probably doesn't know at this young age that she is passing by several of the 11,170 monuments in her country, which is the size of the state of Pennsylvania. She then may pass by some stylish Pyongyang citizens on North Korean smartphones who are scrolling through apps that present their state news on their phones. She then probably passes by older citizens who are standing near each other, maybe with their hands behind their back, reading the state newspaper together that are hung on newspaper holders. She then walks past buildings that have signs on them indicating what date one of the Kims visited that venue, and then walks past signs that are larger than probably billboards in DC or Boston that energetically proclaim aspirations of the Korean Workers' Party and the revolution. She finally arrives at preschool, and then as part of her day, she studies 90 minutes of, quote, greatness education, or education about the three Kims. She sings songs, she plays games, paints art or studies art, listens to music, maybe a documentary, maybe a movie, and learns nursery rhymes that she learns and enjoys with her classmates, which are all tools that are part of the landscape to politically educate this girl and all of her classmates from a young age. When she returns home, she may come across a self-criticism session being held in the Inminban she lives in, or the neighborhood unit that she lives in. When she enters her home, she may hear her father making comments about the self-criticism session that he had to participate at his workplace earlier that day, and maybe her mother making remarks about the self-criticism session that she had to participate in at the factory that she worked in. Then after dinner, If the family isn't too tired from the day, they may turn on the TV if they have one, or the radio. And they may watch or listen to KCNA News or watch a musical performance or an arts documentary or a nature documentary on the state channel. Note that according to this report, all of the reporters, actors, and writers and journalists serve the PAD in North Korea. So every theme, word, spacing, punctuation has to all be approved multiple times before going public. Before this little girl goes to bed, her father leads the family in saying something similar to a religious prayer while respectfully gesticulating towards the Kim portraits hanging in the best spot in their home to thank the Kims for providing them with food, clothing, and everything else that they have to live their lives. This average day in the viewpoint of a little girl, this hypothetical preschooler, underscores the pervasiveness and the power that the PAD has, which this report articulates so effectively. The second thing I want to do is to underscore how important it is to understand a system if a party is interested in developing and deploying interventions to influence it. I'm not sure if Nat Kretchun spoke before me or if he'll share his remarks after me, but he speaks to the point in section 6 of this report about PAD's censorship mechanisms and how they are continuing to develop and become more sophisticated over time in order to censor the population, the North Korean population. This report details the intricate the inner workings, the precision, and the overlapping efforts to reinforce the state messages to every person, every day, everywhere in this country through the PAD. Understanding just how powerful this organization is essential to be able to influence the same population that the PAD is targeting. So for any organization or individuals or agencies out there who are interested or are currently researching, developing distribution technologies, or curating content to distribute to North Korean people, it is really vital to read this report. This applies especially to civil society organizations that are funded by DRL, NED, and are very active in this space today. I just want to end by saying once again, thank you. Huge congratulations to Mr. Bob Collins for bringing to light just how effective and powerful this organization is. And this research is helping all of us better understand North Korea's propaganda machine and in turn underscore the urgent and critical need for information distributors to become more knowledgeable by reading this report to provide North Koreans with repeat exposure to substantive and insightful and interesting, uncensored and unauthorized content. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jieun. A great way of understanding the way PAD impacts the lives of ordinary North Koreans, in particular the life of a young girl in North Korea. I'm going to go to our next discussant. Colonel David Maxwell is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, vice president of CAPS, most importantly, board member of HRNK, a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Army. He retired as a Special Forces colonel. The final assignment was to teach national security strategy at the National War College. Colonel Maxwell is very well known within the think tank community here in Korea and elsewhere in the Asia Pacific for his very strong views on Korean unification, the need for Korean unification, and the need for robust, effective information campaigns that may eventually change hearts and minds in North Korea. Dave, on to you, sir.
Thank you, Greg, and I echo all the comments of starting with Ambassador Turner and in commending Bob and his great work here. I don't think we can, I think all the remarks do illustrate how important this report is and the value that it provides all of us in understanding the problems that we face in the North. Let me start with a quote from Dr. Jong-un, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia Pacific. And at a conference a number of years ago, she asked a question that I have repeated many times that is, I think, germane to this. And this is, she asked, who does Kim Jong-un fear the most? The American military or the Korean people in the North? And I think you all know the answer to that is the Korean people in the North. And it really gets to what Bob is talking about in this report, how ideology, how the sidewalk, doesn't leave any room for any growth of grass in the Korean people's brain in the North. I think that's really, really important to understand. And while we look at what the Propaganda and Agitation Department puts out, we tend to think that we're the target, especially when they attack the military, attack the alliance, attack South Korea. But I think we have to consider that one of the important actions of the Propaganda and Agitation Department is to build up that threat, that external threat, because it is that external threat that the PAD and Kim Jong-un and the Kim family regime use to justify the sacrifices and suffering of the Korean people in the North as they prioritize the development of nuclear weapons and missiles and conduct its strategy. And its strategy is really threefold: political warfare against South Korea and the ROK-US alliance, blackmail diplomacy, the use of provocations and increased tensions to gain political and economic concessions, and the development of advanced military capabilities to both support political warfare and blackmail diplomacy, or ultimately to use force to unify the peninsula. And so the Propaganda and Agitation Department creates these threats, really emphasizes them, and the target of those threats, or the understanding of those threats, is the Korean people in the North. And I think we are often mistaken when we listen to their propaganda and people say, well, North Korea needs security guarantees, or North Korea, everything will be okay if U.S. forces leave the peninsula. It generates thinking among some that there's a way out of these problems if we just appease the regime. And I think that's where this report is so important, is that we have to understand the messages that are sent, and they're not always intended for us. Again, I really think the primary target audience is internal. And everything that the PAD does is really to control the ideology, control the minds of the Korean people in the North. I recall meeting a Korean who had left North Korea, who believed that she had freedom in North Korea. She believed she was free because that's how she was brought. And I think Dr. Baek's illustration of the young child is really important to see. From the youngest age, they are totally indoctrinated, and they end up believing what they are told. And so she believed she was free until she arrived in South Korea. And then, of course, she realized that she had no conception. In her words, she had no idea what freedom was based on the life she had lived in the North until she saw it in the South. And I think that just really illustrates how powerful the Propaganda and Agitation Department is in manipulating the mindsets. Kim Kwang-jin, a friend of HRNK, another escapee from the North, we often asked him, how do people process the outside information that is getting in with this ideological indoctrination? And he says that people have a psychological paralysis, that they do have awareness of the outside world, but they have to survive. And this, they have to follow the indoctrination. And again, I think the Bob's illustration about the sidewalk and the grass is really important for us to try to understand. Which, one thing I'd like to say is that it is so hard for us who have lived our entire lives in freedom, and for us to grasp what is actually happening. And I fear often that people who look at the rhetoric that comes out of the Propaganda and Agitation Department And I too often look at some of the way they say things as, quite humorous and think, how could anybody believe that? That it's really over the top. Well, it is over the top to us. But if this is the only information that you've been exposed to your entire life, and again, I think it's really important to understand the teachers are an extension, and I think even the father and mother, as Jieun illustrated and Bob has emphasized, everybody is complicit in this indoctrination, particularly of the youth. And I'd just like to, if Bob gets a chance, I'd like to ask him, or I'd like him to answer the question of how policymakers and strategists should use this report. I think it's valuable, and I'd just like to hear him say that. The other thing that I'd like to ask is, and this really goes to my experience in studying revolution and studying, how governments are overthrown and how change occurs. And one of the most important things to do is to seize control of the communications apparatus and to control the narrative, control the messages. And you see this happen in countries around the world. And it leads me to think about and ask this question of Bob, is that, if there were change in North Korea, if the regime was no longer there, is there any value in trying to use the propaganda and agitation department to create new messages that might be favorable to stability and ultimately to unification? Or is the propaganda and agitation department so thoroughly compromised by the lies that it has told, for the last 7 decades, that it would be of no value? And if the people were liberated, would the propaganda and agitation department be able to provide a role or not? And so I ask that question because I do think we have to think long term, and a strategy for us to think about is really threefold. I'll just close with this: human rights up front, information campaign, and then pursuit of a free and unified Korea. And to me, that really, those 3 lines of effort really shape the way I think we should be thinking about the future. And of course, information is really at the heart of what we're talking about. So I commend Bob and HRNK for this great report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Bob, would you like to answer Dave's questions first?
Sure. In terms of looking at the pad for what we should learn on our side about the pad, North Korea has been doing information warfare from the beginning when the 25th Army moved into North Korea, and they brought along their Soviet Koreans, and they started teaching information warfare, a undeveloped form, but still that was a focus for them, and it's developed, every year since then. And so I think it's important for anybody that in the U.S. government, whether it's military or State Department or wherever, is to understand the structure, capabilities, and intent of the PAD, so that when there's a counter information warfare against North Korea, they have a good idea of what their capabilities are and how they deal with that, and develop strategies to overcome some of the stronger points or more emphasized points of the propaganda and agitation department. And I think that would be of value for every single individual that has a responsibility to conduct information warfare or support information warfare against North Korea. On the second one, is there value for the PAD to use the PAD for messages after regime failure? I don't think so. After regime collapse, not necessarily state collapse, there's going to be a whole new form of leadership, and if the party does not survive, then there's going to be the establishment of new agencies. The individuals that are now working, like let's just say the reporters, that are working in the PAD, they're certainly knowledgeable about that there are differences between North Korean society and the outside world. They're certainly not naive about that because they have to deal with it almost every day and knowing what's going on so they can counter it. So I think that really if a new regime or a new government takes over, they establish new agencies. And I think those individuals move to those new agencies where they have freedom to express what's more honest to the North Korean population. And I think it's important that that they see an avenue to get rid of this lingering problematics of working for the Korean Workers' Party and the PAD specifically, and move on to a new agency where they think that they can replicate news reporting like South Korea does, and that'll be the model I think that they'll take on. So that's my view on those two questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bob and Dave. Our next and final discussant of the day is Dr. George Hutchinson, who's a board member of the International Council of Korean Studies, also editor of the International Journal of Korean Studies. He spent quite a lot of time in the U.S. Air Force, was based in South Korea, was stationed, yes, at the Pentagon as well, and a lot of other places. Most importantly, Bob has already mentioned this. We have published 3 reports on North Korea's information environment. One was Martin Williams' Digital Trenches on the Information Counteroffensive. Of course, today's report by Bob Collins on the PAD, and the report by George Hutchinson, Army of the Indoctrinated, a report on the circulation of information within the KPA, within the Korean People's Army. George, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Greg, and thanks for everybody for your presence today. So congratulations once again to the entire HRNK team. I've worked with that team, and I know how awesome they are. They really helped when I wrote that KPA report. Greg, many thanks to you for your continued nonpartisan support for the research, the very special research that we do in this space. And again, to Bob, congratulations. As a community of Korean watchers, we're all indebted to the work that goes on here. Ambassador Turner, your kickoff this morning was just the right insight to get this going. So for the next couple of minutes, what I'd like to do is just focus quickly on the report's relevance. I might touch on a little bit of what Dave was asking a little while ago, particularly from the vantage point of what we researchers, scholars, and policy practitioners are interested in. Why would we use Bob's report? And so I want to make 3 points. The first one is the report's place in the reference literature. So you'll find that the report, aptly entitled "The Kim Jong-un Regime's Thwarted Indoctrination," which indeed it is, adds to the literature as a key piece to understanding the puzzle of North Korea's human rights denial. So the report also adds to the signature set of, so we did the 3-part series, but it also adds to the signature set of reports that Bob has done. And I'm gonna name just a few of those real quick. So if you build a little reference shelf and you want to research this, you'd start off probably with what I'm looking at anyway, just to name a few. Sungbun, which that report was published in 2012, that details North Korea's caste system. Pyongyang Republic, published in 2016, covers the regime's power institutions that combine and project doctrine. Cradle to Grave, 2017, takes us deeper into the regime's operationalization of human rights denial. And then we get to the organizational level of analysis in 2019 with the OGD report. That's covers down on the central role of the organization and guidance department in suppressing human rights and furthering the regime's interests. And that takes us to where we're at now with the PAD report. And with this new report, you'll see that the OGD and the PAD symbiotically determine what information can be accessed by North Koreans, and then frames and disseminates that information using various forms of indoctrination, which was illustriously presented a little while ago. And this is a great big violation of fundamental human rights as we understand them under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, as we know, recognizes the agency, dignity, and rights of the individual, where the North Korean approach is obviously a collectivist approach. So first point being, the new PAD report's place alongside the other seminal reports that provide the full picture on North Korean human rights denial. This is a major puzzle piece. It doesn't finalize things, but it's a major puzzle piece. Second, why is the report so important? So this is my parsing of the report. The research question from the report that I got addresses how North Korea frames, preserves, and then furthers its monolithic system of rule to ensure unchallenged loyalty and glorification of the regime. So the report addresses this. In a previous report, and I think it was the OGD report, Bob mentions an unnamed Western diplomat who once said, "We know more about distant galaxies than we do about North Korea." And so it's a great quote. And the DPRK is certainly a well-established challenge for the international relations scholar, the practitioners, the policy folks out there that try and dig into what's going on inside the regime, but have a tough time due to the opaque nature of the system. And so the great utility of this report is it gives us a reference look. It gives us a peek inside North Korea's black box to see how the Kim regime uses the PAD to preserve, strengthen the monolithic system of control as it implements its policy of human rights denial. And so this second point is one of the primary reasons why the report is so essential as a reference, because it helps us to understand the machinery that drives North Korea's system of human rights denial and the plight of countless innocents from North Korea that are stuck frozen in that system. And then third, there's a section in the report that I find particularly useful. That's section 10, PAD leaders, past and present. This section and other parts of the report provide, and this is particularly useful, I think, for the researcher and the practitioner, a human terrain map. If you go through, you'll find that there's a good terrain map that it doesn't just list names with affiliations like you'd find maybe in an appendix, but it explains the relational aspect of the PAD within the hierarchy, within the institutional hierarchy of North Korea. Two notable examples, of course, being Kim Jong-il, who held multiple positions in the PAD before becoming the leader, I think, between 73 and 85. And then today, as we know, Kim Yo-jong is the sister of Kim Jong-un, is the de facto leader of the PAD. So it's a critically important organization with a critically important function for the regime, but it also clearly, from an institutional organizational relationship standpoint, is a very interesting and useful organization to study. So those are my main points. Those are the things, those are the big rocks that I got out of the report, and I wanted to offer those up, not dwell on them too long. I'll get to questions. So once again, congratulations to Bob and HRNK, and good luck, and we hope there's another report coming down the road.
Oh, several.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, George. Greatly appreciated. We have time to take a few questions if you're ready. Peter Humphrey.
Mr. Collins, I continue to marvel at the extent to which you beat the classified information. You are a one-man Bellingcat, and God bless you for that.
Thank you.
I see here that the guys who are going to know the BS the most are the guys who produce the BS.
Yeah.
And that seems to open up a particularly unique vulnerability within the regime. So that if, to what extent we can target the PAD to the extent that we can target the workers who are producing the BS, it seems that those are the guys who know the truth and might cave more than other sectors of society.
Yeah.
You think that's possible?
It would be very difficult. The analogy that this foreign diplomat talked about, trying to understand distant galaxies, makes many of us feel like we're astronomers and we're looking through a telescope. What happens a million light years ago. It's difficult. Frequently you can get information coming in like the reporters do, like you suggested. But what you do with that's another issue. Getting at reporters in terms of trying to get them to be vulnerable while they remain in North Korea is difficult because their version of a Sengwal Chunghwa takes place every 3 days, not every week. Same with farmers. I really don't know why it's the problem with the farmers, but they are not only at the spear of information warfare for North Korea, but they're also the spear of the political officer that's watching everything that they do. And so there are certain groups of individuals that have a tighter surveillance range than others do, particularly by political officers who then, if they see a problem, references it to the Ministry of State Security. And these reporters and whatnot are all very keen on this. They understand this. And so like Dave was talking about, it's a matter of self-preservation, unless they have a very clear path to get around it. I'll give you one example, not necessarily a reporter, but how a North Korean thinks. Kim Kwang-jin, who he had mentioned before, has spent a 6-month sabbatical working here at HRNK. And I first interviewed him back then. We've been friends ever since. He worked by himself in Singapore on a reinsurance scam. And every year he'd go back and he'd bring a bunch load of money to the regime. And he'd go to his boss and give him an envelope, here's your cut, okay? And then he'd go to his second-rate boss and give him a cut, okay? But then the last time that he did that, I said, both his boss and his secondary boss said, no. And then he instantly knew he was in trouble. And so not long after that, he saw that he had to defect. And that's what he did. And he's been a source of lots of valuable information on that. That's what the reporters have to think through is, I don't want to get myself in a position where I have to realize that my bosses, intermediate bosses, are now going to report on me and his suspicions of me. Because even when you have a suspicion in North Korea, it's off to the hoochkow, you're gone immediately. And, and even if you get a trial, which is very unlikely, but if you give a trial, the lawyers work for the state, they don't work for you. So the representation, it's just non-existent. And so they're all very cognizant of this problem, and converting them would be a very rare event indeed. Hope I answered your question. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter and Bob, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Collins, for making this report, and I'm interested to read more of it. My name is Sean Nolan. I work at the Institute for Korean Studies at George Washington University. I'm curious specifically on some of the comments that Nat Kretchun made regarding censorship and information coming in from China. Specifically now, post-pandemic, we're seeing a reopening of North Korea, and reopening, I guess, in air quotes. But I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to what the PAD's role is in working with, say, the Ministry of State Security or other organs within North Korea as far as managing that reopening to limit information. And I'm curious as to what the PAD's role is, maybe specifically physically on the border or with limiting that physical flow of information in from China specifically, now that things are opening, at least in a limited fashion post-pandemic?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, when they shut down the border 3 years ago and shut it off for 3 years and 7 months, the information that was coming from China into northern North Korea, either whether it's transfer of cell phones or whatever, was becoming problematic for the regime. And certainly the PAD and their various organizations joined partnership with not only the military along the front lines, but also the Ministry of State Security to try and combat that. The closure closed down the ability to send these information through cell phones or movies or whatever the case might be into North Korea. Now that it's opened up, although I haven't seen any reporting on this, it would be unusual for North Korea to think that somehow that before opening up, the regime had to come up with a plan to emphasize the prevention, the reoccurrence and prevention of more information coming into the North. We'd be foolish to think that they didn't plan for this. North Koreans are excellent planners. They're not always accurate, but they do plan. And some plans work out, some plans don't. That's true for us also. And so right now, I'm pretty sure that the teams that are designed to deal with these problematics are reinvigorated, maybe even financed more in order to succeed and prevent that information flow. But evidence shows, historical evidence shows that that's the more they try to do that, the more that the Chinese and the North Koreans that are interested in the cell phone sales and whatnot, the more ingenious they are in terms of getting the information across the border. So my point is obviously is that the North Koreans prepared for this when they knew they were going to open up the border again. Hope that answered your question.
Well, great questions and answers. Let me note that there have been two main attempts to stifle American freedom of expression as it relates to North Korea and North Korean human rights. One was the Sony hack, the other one, the construction crew and the pick hammer outside the DACOR Bacon House today. I'm really sorry about that. We have no control over that. If you look at the report and you have a copy of the report, please take a look at page 8, Roman numeral 8. You will see the names of those who have supported our author, Bob Collins, in his efforts to finalize this report. It's a long list of names. I am going to mention those who are in this room today. Raymond Ha. Raymond, thank you very much for your work editing the report. Lauren Chung, thank you very much for your work on the executive summary. And Joseph Lim, thank you very much for your work on the graphic design and the typesetting. Extraordinarily important. This is not your first report here, and you've done a terrific job. A true masterpiece. Thank you very much. Of course, let me thank once again Ambassador Julie Turner for honoring us with her presence today. Our report author, Bob Collins, our discussants, Colonel David Maxwell, Dr. George Hutchinson, Dr. Jieun Baek, and Nat Kretchun for contributing to today's program. We've been very thorough about setting up a mini studio, having perfect sound and picture. We'll see how it comes out given the circumstances outside. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Let me remind you, if you're available, you've also received an invitation from us for our next program, our next in-person, rather hybrid program on Thursday morning. It's a program co-hosted with the South Korean Ministry of Unification. I hope to see you then. Please stay in touch. We'll keep you posted on HRNK's work, activities, on upcoming reports. If we don't see you before then, happy holidays to you and your family.
Greg, it's Giving Tuesday. It's Giving Tuesday.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, and the message went out while we were running this program. It is Giving Tuesday today, so a very auspicious coincidence. Of course, we have gently inserting a donation envelope in those reports. Keep HRNK in mind. Thank you, Dave, as you make your plans for end of the year giving. It's really a time of great need. Ever since I joined this organization, I have to admit and confess that it's the time of greatest need. So any help will be highly appreciated. Please tell family and friends, help us produce more of these reports. Keep you posted. Thank you.